The screen in front of him shows nothing useful. A moment ago it was clear. Contacts moving in formation, bearing east-southeast, altitude stable, closing at expected speed. Now it is white, pure, featureless white. Hundreds of returns where there should be dozens. Thousands. The entire display has dissolved into static, a blizzard of false echoes filling the glass from edge to edge. The young operator at the radar station in northern Germany does the only thing he can think to do. He calls for his supervisor. The supervisor stares. He has never seen this before. Nobody has. He picks up the telephone to the fighter control room. The line is jammed with voices doing the same thing. Outside, the anti-aircraft batteries are beginning to fire. Not because they have a target, but because someone has decided that firing into the dark is better than doing nothing. The searchlights swing across the sky in long, slow arcs. They find nothing. Whatever is out there, it is invisible. The defenses of northern Germany, the most sophisticated integrated air defense network in the world, are shooting at ghosts. It is the night of July 24th, 1943. The answer to what happened to those radar screens begins 6 hours earlier on a row of airfields in eastern England, where 791 bombers are turning over their engines in the last light of a long summer evening. Among the crews being briefed tonight, 24 have been given an unusual additional instruction. Every 60 seconds, push a bundle of aluminum strips through the flare chute. Use a stopwatch. Don't stop until you're told. What follows over the next 10 days will kill somewhere between 34,000 and 46,000 people. It will convince Nazi Germany's leadership that the war is effectively over. It will convince the commander of British Bomber Command that victory is months away. Both conclusions will be wrong. This is the story of the most destructive conventional air raid in the history of warfare, and of everything it failed to accomplish. The weapon that blinds the German radar has a name: window. In its physical form, it is almost embarrassingly simple. Aluminum strips, 10.5 inches long, 3/4 of an inch wide, attached to black paper and packed into brown bags of 2,200 strips each. Joan Curran, a Welsh physicist at Britain's secret radar research establishment, refined the design with precision, cutting the strips to exactly half the wavelength of German radar frequencies, maximizing their reflective return. When dropped from a moving aircraft, they drift slowly downward, each strip a ghost contact to any radar looking for them. 1,000 strips become 1,000 contacts. 2 million strips fill every radar screen in northern Germany with noise. The British have known this for more than a year. So have the Germans. Both sides independently developed the same technology, and both sides understood exactly what it would do if used. And so, for over a year, neither side used it. The British feared that deploying window would teach the Germans the tactic, and the Germans would use it on the next raid over London. The Germans feared the same thing in reverse. It was a standoff built entirely on mutual terror, each side holding back a weapon that could save their own aircraft and blind the other's defenses, neither willing to move first. Meanwhile, RAF crews died on raids that window could have protected. The math of that calculation was never made public. On the 15th of July, 1943, the British break the deadlock. The decision comes from the highest levels. The strategic benefits now outweigh the risks. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, Commander-in-Chief of RAF Bomber Command, is given permission to use window on an operation of his choice. He does not deliberate long. He chooses Hamburg. Harris is 51 years old in July 1943. His hair is still fair, his build thickening slightly, his manner so blunt that senior officers learn quickly not to mistake directness for invitation. He runs Bomber Command from High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire. A wood-paneled operations room, maps on the walls, reconnaissance photographs spread across tables. His morning briefings are brief. He listens to the previous night's results and the weather forecast, flips through the folders his lieutenants have prepared, and makes his decision without discussion. He came to this from a long way away. At 16, his parents sent him to Rhodesia. He farmed, drove coaches, mined. In 1914, he joined the 1st Rhodesian Regiment, fought in South Africa, then came back to England and joined the Royal Flying Corps. He flew in France in 1917, survived, and stayed in uniform when the war ended. The interwar years he spent developing bombing tactics, thinking about what aircraft could do at scale, deciding that the future of war lay not in supporting ground troops, but in striking directly at the enemy's capacity and will to fight. By February 1942, he commands every heavy bomber the RAF possesses. His doctrine is not a secret. He commits it to paper with a candor that would have embarrassed his political superiors had it become public. The aim of the bombing campaign, he writes, is the destruction of German cities, the killing of German workers, the disruption of civilian life throughout Germany, the creation of a refugee problem on an unprecedented scale, the breakdown of morale at home and at the front. These, in his own words, are accepted and intended aims. Winston Churchill, when asked by a member of Parliament whether the bombing campaign targets civilians, answers, "My dear sir, this is a military and not a civilian war." Harris, in his operations room at High Wycombe, is selecting residential districts as aiming points. Both statements are on the record. Hamburg is where the record meets reality. Hamburg on the evening of July 24, 1943, is a city living in the familiar discomfort of wartime without quite believing in its own destruction. 1.75 million people, Europe's largest port, the Ulster and the Elbe running through it, the great Uferpalast cinema, the Reich's largest, cafes still open despite everything, a zoo where children go on Sunday afternoons. The heat has been extraordinary. A thunderstorm broke 2 days earlier and evaporated almost immediately, leaving the air dry and tight and hot in a way that has not released for weeks. Hamburg's geography is precise. The U-boat yards stretch along the waterfront, Blom and Voss, where the battleship Bismarck was built, where 400 submarines were assembled across the course of the war. These are the strategic targets, the reason RAF planners put Hamburg on the list. But close to the city center, within 2 miles of the main rail station, are the residential districts, Hammerbrook, Borgfelde, Rothenburg-Sort, Billwerder. Dense apartment blocks, narrow streets, interior courtyards packed tight between buildings. Timber and plaster, many stories high, full of people who work in those yards and factories and who live here because this is where they have always lived. Among them tonight, Paul Peters, who has a wife and a shelter nearby. Henny Clank, who knows which streets to run if the sirens go. Heinrich Johansson, who has a son. And hundreds of thousands of others whose names the records will not keep, because there will be no records to keep them in. The sirens go at 12:33 in the morning. By the time the first Hamburg bombs fall, Window has been in the air for an hour. The bundles go out over the Dutch coast, then over the German border, then in a continuous stream as 728 aircraft of the main force approach the city. The radar stations that should be tracking them see nothing coherent. The fighter controllers shout instructions into radios and hear only static in return. The night fighters, Bf-110s and Ju-88s circling in their assigned grid boxes, waiting for vectors that never come, are effectively blind. The searchlights sweep. The anti-aircraft guns fire into empty sectors of sky, at altitudes nobody has confirmed, at bearings nobody can establish. In 50 minutes, 728 aircraft dropped 2,284 tons of bombs on Hamburg. 5 times the heaviest load ever dropped on any single city in a single raid. The bombers come home. Of the 791 that lifted off, 12 do not return. Less than 2%. The crews landing back in England before dawn had prepared for losses 3 or 4 times that number. 12 names on the boards. The weapon worked. It worked exactly as both sides feared it would. By late morning, the sun over Hamburg is barely visible through smoke columns that have been rising since 1 a.m. and show no signs of stopping. The RAF gives Hamburg 2 days, then sends 787 aircraft back. The aiming points for the second raid are not the U-boat yards. They are not the Blom and Voss shipyards, not the Klöckner aero engine plant, not any specific industrial target. The aiming points are the densely packed residential districts of Hammerbrook, Burgfelder, Rothenburg-Sort, the working-class streets within 2 miles of the city center. This is the concentrated area Harris's doctrine has selected. This is where the bombs will fall. It is shortly before midnight on July 27th. The 787 aircraft of the second wave, 353 Avro Lancasters, 244 Handley Page, Halifaxes, 116 Short Stirlings, 74 Vickers Wellingtons arrive over Hamburg and begin their work. The sequence is deliberate. High explosives first, to strip roofs off, shatter windows and doors, tear open the interiors of buildings, then incendiaries, dropped into structures that can no longer contain fire. In the close-packed courtyard blocks of Hammerbrook and Rothenburg-Sort, where narrow streets form channels between 8-story buildings, the fires begin to find each other. There is one detail that nobody planned for. Hamburg had a mutual aid agreement with the fire service of Hanover. On this night, the RAF is simultaneously raiding Hanover. Hanover's crews have been recalled to their own city. Hamburg is fighting what is about to happen with what Hamburg has. It is not enough. What happens next has a name. Firestorm. Firestorm. Multiple fires merging into a single thermodynamic event, consuming oxygen faster than the surrounding air can replace it, pulling air inward from the periphery at speeds reaching 150 miles per hour. The temperature in some streets exceeds 800 degrees Celsius. The asphalt melts, the canals ignite, fuel oil from damaged ships spreading across the water and burning. The column of fire rises 1,000 feet. It is visible from 200 miles away. Paul Peters staggers from his shelter into the street. The wind tears his hat from his head and sends it spinning through the air as a burning ball. Around him, small children are lifted from the ground by the force of the wind and thrown into the flames. He watches this happen. His wife does not make it out of the shelter. Henny Clank reaches the street and finds that the street is burning. The trees are burning, their tops bent down to the pavement. Horses from a nearby hauling yard run past, their coats on fire. The air itself seems to burn. Heinrich Johansson covers himself and his son with a wet blanket and lies in a gravel pile at a construction site, waiting. He watches people nearby turn into living torches where they stand. In the basement, shelters of Hammerbrook. The oxygen is being drawn out of the air and replaced with carbon monoxide and smoke. Some people lose consciousness without understanding why. Others understand exactly why. The Hamburg police president submits his report in August 1943. He is a Nazi official, not a survivor, not a journalist, and his language is official throughout. On the basis of a layer of ash on the floor of a large air raid shelter, he writes, doctors could only estimate the number of dead at somewhere between 250 and 300. The destruction is such that in many cases, there is literally nothing left of the people who were there. Even now, he writes, 100 or more corpses are found each day. Above the city, in the aircraft still crossing overhead, at least one RAF pilot notes the smell. At altitude, the smell of burning flesh, rising 20,000 feet in the smoke column. Then, darkness. Somewhere between 34,000 and 46,000 people die in Hamburg between July 24th and August 3rd, 1943. The most commonly accepted modern estimate is 37,000. Most are never identified. Some of the dead exist only as the memory of an ash layer on a basement floor. Inside the Reich, in the days that follow, the panic is real and reaches the top. Albert Speer, Nazi Germany's Minister for Armaments, the man responsible for keeping German factories producing guns and aircraft and submarines, writes in his memoir that Hamburg put the fear of God in me. He goes further. He tells Hitler directly, if the Allies repeat this on 6 more German cities, armaments production halts. Not degrades, halts. The war ends on Allied terms. His recommendation is treated as the warning of a rational man who has done the mathematics. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, looks at Hamburg and draws the same conclusion. It is, by his own account, the first time he considers that Germany might have to seek peace. Hitler does not visit Hamburg. His Gauleiter, Karl Kaufmann, begs him to come, to walk the ruins, to show his face, to tell the people of Hamburg that Germany has not forgotten them. Hitler refuses. Hermann Göring visits instead, decorates some anti-aircraft gunners in the rubble, meets with city officials, tours what remains. Göring had once boasted that if a single enemy bomb fell on a German city, the German people could call him Meyer. Nobody calls him Meyer to his face. There are no intact streets to stand in. The official news blackout holds. Senior Nazi officials record in their diaries a leadership that believes the war is closing in, not toward victory, but toward a final accounting that Hamburg has suddenly made imaginable. The Reich Chancellery and the Propaganda Ministry are arriving at the same conclusion the rubble demands. And in the post-war interrogation rooms, Speer adds one more thing. The damage, he says, was terrible, but the appearance of window, the realization that Britain had held this blinding weapon for over a year and chosen this night to use it, that was its own shock entirely. The German defenses had not simply failed, they had been rendered irrelevant by technology that Germany itself possessed and had never deployed. The British had simply been willing to move first. At High Wycombe, Harris reads the reconnaissance reports, the photographs, the damage assessment. He writes to Sir Charles Portal, Chief of the Air Staff, in August 1943. His bomber command, he promises, will produce in Germany by April the 1st, 1944, a state of devastation in which surrender is inevitable. He believes this. He writes it with the conviction of a man who has the evidence in front of him. Speer, from the other side of the ruins, believes the same thing, that 6 more raids like Hamburg would accomplish what Harris promises. 2 men, enemies, one trying to win and one trying to survive, are looking at the same burning city and reaching the same conclusion. Neither of them is right. Within 5 months, Hamburg's industry recovers to 80% of its pre-bombing output. The U-boat yards were never seriously damaged. Not a single bomb struck the Kluckner aero engine plant throughout the entire campaign. The workers who survived rebuilt what they could reach, and production resumed because the machines that mattered had been in buildings the bombs had missed, or in buildings that could be repaired faster than anyone anticipated. The 3rd and 4th raids returned to Hamburg. 7 777 aircraft on July 29th, then 737 on August 2nd. The last wave flying into a violent thunderstorm that scatters bombs across a vegetable oil factory and an opera house, whose stage, stacked with stored bread, survives undamaged. At 2:55 in the morning on August 3rd, a Wellington captained by Flight Lieutenant J.C. Morton of No. 466 Squadron releases its incendiaries over the city. The campaign is over. The RAF has lost 87 bombers across all 4 raids. The Americans, flying daylight precision runs, have lost 21 more. Window saved hundreds of RAF aircraft. The Kluckner factory, the strategic target, is untouched. In November 1943, Harris launches the Battle of Berlin. Berlin is larger, better defended, further inland, and its commanders have had months to adapt to window. No firestorm comes. The fires spread but do not merge. The anti-aircraft guns are more numerous and more precisely directed. Between November 1943 and March 1944, Bomber Command loses 1,047 aircraft over Berlin, with another 1,682 damaged. April 1, 1944, arrives. Germany has not surrendered. Hamburg did matter strategically, but not as Harris intended. By August 1943, 45% of all German fighter aircraft had been pulled from the fighting fronts and repositioned on home defense. Anti-aircraft gun deployment across Germany increased by 25%. The Luftwaffe, that should have been supporting German armies in Russia and Italy and the Mediterranean, was instead defending the Reich's cities against a bombing campaign that the Reich's own armaments minister had said would end the war. While the industries that bombing could not quite destroy fast enough were rebuilt by the people who had survived. The bleeding was real. It simply was not the bleeding anyone planned for. The approximately 900,000 Hamburg civilians who fled the burning city went many places. Some went to Schleswig-Holstein, some to the Bayreuth district, some to Hanover, to Magdeburg, to Danzig. Some went to Saxony, some went to Dresden. In February 1945, 19 months after Hamburg, 7 months before the end of the war, Dresden burned the same way. Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Davidson flew over Hamburg on the night of July 24, 1943, in the dark, and saw only fires below and a sky that was safe in a way Hamburg skies had never been safe before. He wrote in his log that morning that his gut had begun its familiar crawl when the target was announced. He came home. He flew other raids. The war continued. In July 1945, Davidson comes back to Hamburg. Not in an aircraft, on the ground, in daylight, in a country that has been defeated for 2 months. He walks through what is left of the city, acre upon acre of lifeless ruins. He writes later, not for publication, not for an interviewer, but for himself, that it was one thing to bomb in the heat of battle, and another to see one's contribution against the background of a defeated enemy. The war ended in May 1945, not in April 1944 as Harris had promised, not through the destruction of German cities, which recovered faster than they burned. It ended when boots and armor crossed what could not be crossed by aircraft alone, the ground itself, the last territory, the last positions held by men who would not stop until someone came and stopped them in person. In 1992, a statue of Arthur Harris is unveiled in Whitehall, London. The Queen Mother is there for the ceremony. So are protesters. One shouts that Harris was a war criminal. Harris himself has been dead for 6 years. What the statue cannot resolve, what 80 years have not resolved, is the question that Hamburg raises and refuses to answer cleanly. Not whether the bombing happened. It happened. Not whether the people who ordered it believed it would end the war. They believed it with everything they had. The question is what you call a decision to burn a city full of people. Workers, children, men who built submarines, men who drove horses, men who simply lived where they lived, in the service of a strategy that did not work, against an enemy that genuinely had to be defeated, in the middle of a war that had already claimed more lives than anyone knew how to count. Hamburg was the heaviest air assault in the history of warfare. It killed tens of thousands of civilians in 3 hours. It frightened the men running Nazi Germany to the edge of despair. Albert Speer thought it would end the war. Arthur Harris thought it would end the war. Both men were looking at the same evidence, were in the same month, and they were not wrong to be afraid of what they saw. The fire burned for 3 hours. The war burned for 2 more years. What Hamburg was, what it means, is a question that a statue in Whitehall and a field of ash in Hammerbrook have been answering differently ever since.